Hello, I'm Scott Stephenson. I'm President and CEO of the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, and this is another episode of AmRev360, where we have conversations about the American Revolution from all angles. I am really excited about our conversation today, and I'll just briefly introduce our two guests. Virginia Logan is the Frolic Weymouth Executive Director and CEO of the Brandywine Conservancy and Art Museum, located in Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, in beautiful Chester County, where I make my home. And Jim Lighthizer, longtime president of the American Battlefield Trust, joining us from Washington, D.C. And welcome to you both. This is a episode that's particularly meaningful to me for being, I guess, for more than 20 years, been a resident of the Brandywine Valley. So about an hour west of Philadelphia. The Brandywine River flows south out of the hills in central Chester County and flows through Wilmington, Delaware. And it is an absolutely beautiful part of the country. It is a place where history, the location of the largest land battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Brandywine, September 11, 1777 took place. It is a place that nurtured a very significant school of American art, started in the late 19th century with the great Howard Pyle and the Brandywine School, and then generations of the Wyeth family and other artists who found great inspiration from the landscape there. I spent a lot of time walking around with my family, paddling the Brandywine River, and for being sort of nestled between so many metropolitan areas and so close to Philadelphia, it's absolutely remarkable to be able to enjoy a landscape in many places feels very unchanged from the 18th century and has so many different streams of American history crossing through it. It's a place, of course, settled by Quaker, English and Welsh and Irish immigrants in the 17th century. It was already kind of an old landscape of Quaker farmers when the American Revolution came knocking on the door, and on September 11, 1777, thousands of British and American troops clashed along the river and in the heights just north of Chaddsford, and a very dramatic battle that continues to leave a mark on the kind of psyche of the neighborhood, and was very inspiring to historians and artists for many generations. And one of the great things about the Brandywine River Museum of Art, of course, is it's just one of these absolute premier American art institutions that has a core exhibition that always includes beautiful pastoral scenes from the 19th through the 20th century, showing you the evolution of the landscape and many of the events that have taken place there, and artists imagining the scenes of fighting on September 11th, 1777. So I wanted to sort of talk about the intersection of the history, the art, and the preservation movement in these acres surrounding Chaddsford, Pennsylvania. And maybe start with the effort to preserve the battlefield itself. Of course, as I mentioned, this was a place where some 30,000 soldiers clashed beginning in the early morning hours of September 11, 1777. And if I could invite you, Jim, to sort of talk about the work of the American Battlefield Trust. Of course, it has its roots in another organization focused on a different American conflict. But I think talk to us a little bit about why it's important to preserve hallowed ground. What makes this land so worthy of preservation? Why are generations of Americans 240 some years later, still so moved by being in these places?
Well, it's thank you, Scott. First, a little background on the American Battlefield Trust. We started out, our roots go back to 1987 when a Civil War battlefield organization, preservation organization, was formed actually in some guy's living room in Fredericksburg, Virginia. There was a merger of that group and another group in 1999 to form what has now become the American Battlefield Trust. And I believe it was 2014, we went from the Civil War preservation business to the Revolutionary War and Civil War preservation business, also including the War of 1812. We did that. We expanded from the Civil War into the Revolutionary War for a lot of reasons. One, nobody was doing it, and it needed to be done. And two, the National Park Service asked us to do it, to get involved. So we did. And I think in that roughly 6 years, we've saved close to like 1,270 acres, something like that. We will generally do at least 2,000 to 3,000 acres a year of Civil War stuff. But having said that, in the 6 years, the 1,270 or so acres that we've saved, probably more Revolutionary War battlefield land saved in the last 6 years than a long period of time. Certainly in that period, the American Battlefield Trust has saved far and away the most land for that period. The reason we think battlefields are important, particularly the Revolutionary War and the Civil War battlefields, because that's the place where America was created and defined. Created in the Revolutionary War and to a certain extent defined, certainly more seriously defined in the Civil War, where we settled the issue of slavery and we settled the issue just as important of secession, which has kept this country together. Maybe just barely now, but it's still together. So we believe that those two wars recognize the creation and defining of this country. And of course, that creation and that defining happened on the battlefields. It didn't happen in courthouses or any other libraries or town halls. It really was determined on the battlefields. The people that won the battles decided the issues. And by and large, people that won the wars decided the issues, for sure. So we believe it's important to save that land because that's where this country was created and defined. We also believe it tells stories that are still relevant today, still matter today. The citizen soldier, fighting for one's version of freedom, honor, duty, standing up for what one believes in, those types of kind of eternal virtues, if you will. And we believe that it can still teach Americans, and still does teach Americans, who they are and why they are the way they are. That is kind of a nutshell what we do and what we stand for. We're also big into teaching. Basically, we build parks and tell stories. That's essentially what we do. We partner with people like the Brandywine Conservancy and other wonderful groups across the country, also to kind of force multiply what we do.
Yeah, so Virginia, I think one of the unique things about Brandywine is it has both a role as a preserver of land, as a conservancy, and operates the art museum. What's the story of the founding of this kind of unique organization? And I think your title probably has something to do with that origin story too, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does. Frolic Weymouth is really the primary character in our being founded. And as a young man, he brought together two other founders, Sir William Prickett and Francis DuPont, because there was this beautiful meadow in the historic village of Childs Ford. And in fact, this meadow was part of the battlefield. And it was under threat of development. They were going to put a hard hat factory there. And you will find in this story the same three threads that wind through so much of Brandywine's work in our history. And that's the importance of the history and sense of place, the natural landscape, and the great works of art. So here comes Frolic Weymouth, who's himself an artist and very close friends with Andrew and Betsy Wyeth, and also with Jamie and Phyllis Wyeth. And their very community is under threat. And so they were formed to first acquire Potts Meadow, and very quickly, as they were articulating the mission and the vision for where the organization would go, it was clear that there were two different parts of the work that the organization would do. And it is conservation and preservation of natural and historical resources, which is where a lot of our work supporting the efforts around the battlefield have come in. And also the celebration and presentation of great works of American art. And you see these three threads weaving their way through some of the works in our collection and through a lot of the accomplishments of Brandywine over the 50 plus years that we've been in existence.
Yeah, it's I tell you, I was recently reading the compiled letters of N.C. Wyeth, so Andrew Wyeth's father, the student of Howard Pyle. And of course, one of the great experiences of going to the Brandywine River Museum for me is I love to see the Nation Makers, which of course was Howard Pyle's famous painting commemorating probably the fighting up on Birmingham Hill. And there's actually the first summer that young 20-year-old N.C. Wyeth from Needham, Massachusetts comes down, and he's there painting in Chadds Ford in the summer school studying under Pyle. And he writes a letter home describing the 4th of July and talking about, this is 1903, and talking about the great celebrations and the firecrackers and how Pyle was like a big kid, you know, enjoyed it as much as the boys. But it's interesting. So they stayed up late, of course, telling stories. Then the next morning they got up and, you know, had more, this was the 5th of July. But then just the two of them, they hitched some horses to a wagon, and he says that Mr. Pyle and NC drove the carriage, and they drove 25 miles just ranging back and forth over the battlefield. And the three of us, of course, know all those roads today. Maybe they're paved, but they're still, you know, down in those little valleys and going across those Quaker farms. And he says Mr. Pyle, you know, told him all the stories and showed him the relics of the battle, and came home and they sat on the porch and talked it over. And then about 10 days later, NC borrows some fishing equipment and decides he's going to go trout fishing down in the little streams in the Brandywine. Of course, that perks my interest because I'm a trout fisherman also. But his attention wanders, and he talks about suddenly feeling transported back to the time of the battle, and he imagines that he sees a bedraggled Continental soldier, you know, sipping water out of the stream, and sort of the beauty of the landscape and the history and, you know, the art all come together. And I've just always it's something that just is so magical about the place. And, you know, I'm curious, you know, Jim, having, you know, being an American Battlefield Trust member, you know, my boyhood interest in history, and I think a lot of children think visually or get excited about the past through images. And surely this must have, you know, figured into your excitement about history as a kid. You must have loved Treasure Island as I did as well.
Well, I can tell you this, for me at least, and I think a lot of people, there's really no substitute for being at the place where the history happened. I remember going, as an example, to Lincoln's Cottage in Washington, D.C., where President Lincoln spent a quarter of his presidency, and the house is still there, and putting my hand on the rail that he used to go up the stairs, or on the mantelpiece in one of his rooms, and knowing that he put his hand there. And there's something that just gives me goosebumps. And walking the land where history was made is as close a connection as we're going to get to the past, as close a nexus, if you will, as close of a time machine as we're going to be able to execute, at least for now. And so the attachment to the land, the connection to the land of the history there's something magic about it.
Yeah, you know, when we were developing the Museum of the American Revolution here, of course, I know you both have seen, we've got a dramatization of the fighting around the Birmingham Meeting House as one of the immersive experiences here at the museum. And we went out, we actually filmed that just a few miles west of the actual battlefield, in a area that we had access to some natural lands property. But we made sure that we had the sun was in the right place and the fields all looked the same and that sort of thing. But I know the Trust and the Conservancy have kind of worked together on preserving one of the most, to me, one of the most evocative spots, Birmingham Hill there, that's just, I guess, just within sight of that Birmingham meeting house where some of the earliest fighting at the Battle of Brandywine took place. And I know there's a comprehensive plan taking place right now, strategic plan. And I don't know, Virginia, would you like to share a little bit of the plans for the site there? I know there is a walking trail and some limited access now for the public, but you know, what's kind of coming down the line there?
Well, thank you for asking about it. And Jim, we so appreciate your help in bringing this dream to a reality. So we now have 113 acres that will be opening to the public as the Birmingham Hill Preserve, which is focusing on the fact that is hallowed ground, that you just have this sense as you're walking that land of the fighting that occurred, and this almost mystical sense. You were there when we dedicated the preserve and were kind enough to speak and loan the replica of the tent. So when you combine being in that field on September 11th with that, the reenactors and that sense, it's just so powerful. And recognizing how important that is part of what led Brandywine to believe it was really vitally important that we not only protect it, but that we transform it into a preserve that will eventually have restored the landscape back to be much as it was during that, that epic battle, and also be open to the public, be something that we can partner with other organizations on. And so, Scott, I think you know, it's no secret, we're really hoping the Museum of the American Revolution will be our key educational partner, among others, as we bring it to life. So we're working on the master plan for Birmingham Hill, and the master plan will be completed within the next couple of months. We've had quite a few experts helping us along the way, in addition to the just scores of people who helped us acquire the property. And it will probably take a good 3 years before the full plan is fully realized. But even today, there is a parking area that Birmingham Township has, and there are some trails around the perimeter. When it's open, there will be almost 2 more miles of trails. But a lot of the goal is to really keep the landscape and keep that sense of what it was like. So it's terrifically exciting as a way to be able to preserve an important part of the battlefield and to be able to share it with the public.
Yeah, no, that's been great to watch. And I know it's been the work of many hands and many years to put those pieces together, other critical pieces. I know with Sandy Hollow and Jim, I think you mentioned earlier before we got started here that there's maybe another piece or two that the trust is working on within Brandywine Battlefield to try to secure.
Yeah, another 72 acres, hopefully, which will make a dent in
Sure thing.
Preserving more of it.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've you know, of course, all three of us are in the field of nonprofits, which involves a lot of fundraising, and I've always felt very jealous. Jim, you've got the best pitch in the world. It's like we want to help us save this piece of ground. You see results really, really quickly, and it's been such a tremendous service to the nation. Really, the work that you all do.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. Been fantastic. Yeah, it was nice to be there a couple years ago when you dedicated that little piece up near Dilworth Town, which is a nice little connector piece. And Virginia, I'm assuming even in the midst of COVID, the pressures of land development do not abate by any means, right? So you all must be burning the midnight oil to try to keep ahead of all the pressures that we face.
Very true, very true. And in fact, I'm really happy to share the fact that we have more active conservation easement projects this year. And a lot of them have particularly come along during the pandemic shutdown than we've had in recent years. So we're really tickled with the ability to continue to advance that effort. And of course, fortunate enough that with the conservation work, that could all continue remotely. During a time period where museums like ours were forced to shut down.
Yeah, that's fabulous. On the museum side, I'm curious. You know, of course, a core experience of the museum are the three generations of the Wyeth family, NC, Andrew, and Jamie Wyeth, and then the kind of broader Brandywine school. But also, it's interesting you're continuing to engage new generations of artists who are inspired by and are interacting with the landscape. Is there anything exciting going on now, or that you would call our attention to?
Well, there are always exciting things going on, and
that was an easy question.
Work on a very long arc in terms of planning projects. One of the things that we've been doing in recent years is working at that interplay in our mission between the art and the conservation. And we're working on a show that had to be postponed because of the pandemic, called Fragile Earth, which will be contemporary living artists who are really inspired by the natural environment. So that will get pushed off for that got pushed off for a year because of the pandemic close down. But of course, you can always come to the museum and see some of the iconic works. And on the theme of the battlefield, one of my favorites is N.C. Wyeth's In a Dream I Saw George Washington, where you have this just fabulous, huge painting. And N.C. Wyeth painted himself in on his mural's stepladder platform. And he's having a conversation with General Washington, who's explaining what's going on in the battle behind him. It's very dramatic. It's got the bold use of light and the action. And then one of the things that's most fascinating to me is down in the corner, completely oblivious to a dead soldier who's hanging over him, is a young Andrew Wyeth as a boy, completely engrossed in sketching the scene as he's sitting there. So it's a wonderful painting. It's very powerful. It draws you in, and it gives that sense of that interrelationship between the history and the art. Yeah,
one of my favorite paintings of Andrew Wyeth, of course, called Osborne's Hill, which is, one of his bare bones, winter scenes that he's so famous for in his work around Chad's Ford, with a very eerie looking crow. And of course, you would have to know this, probably be a local to know that the location is the hill where Cornwallis's wing of the British Army was formed up before it went and assaulted the Birmingham Meeting House, Birmingham Hill, Sandy Hollow. And so, it was an important marshalling area for the battle, and certainly would have been somewhere that kind of the oral history of the battle that would have been passed down from these local farmers to people like Pyle, to NC, to Andrew, must have been kept alive. So yeah,
that is such a powerful painting, and it includes that sort of mystical, moody sense that you get from the landscape. And I mean, you can just imagine that feeling being there. And it's very clear that the history of the lands around them in the Revolutionary War were a great fascination, especially to both Andrew Wyeth and his father, N.C.
Yeah, it's for anyone who's watching, who's inspired by this history. We certainly hope you come to Philadelphia and start your visit at the Museum of the American Revolution. But we feel, I think, so paired with Chad's Ford and with the Brandywine, because it is a place, it's much harder to imagine yourself back in the 18th century, with exceptions in Philadelphia, Christ Church, Independence Hall. There's these little gems that survive, but to really have that experience of landscape. There are some battlefields in the South, certainly, that still have, you have the experience of that sweep of ground and landscape. But for up in the crowded Northeast, I'd put Brandywine up against many other places as just such an evocative place. And then to layer on top of that its connection to this very significant school of American artists is just absolutely 1000%.
Well, thank you, Scott. And one of the interesting phrases that I found in some of the old literature from when we were founded is you had this small group of people led by Frolic who really felt that this was a special place. Chadds Ford Village on the Brandywine Valley particularly. And there was a desire to protect it from the encroaching megalopolis. As you think about it, it's a very sort of late 1960s term, but you fast forward to today and you can still, because of the preservation work and because we actually also have the artist studios where many of those magnificent murals and paintings were done. You can literally come and walk in the footsteps of the artists on some of the trails through the landscape that are as they were when all of this was inspired. And so we have that magnificent opportunity here in Chadds Ford and of course at Birmingham Hill. We hope to further enrich your experience by allowing people to just come to Birmingham Hill and just feel the spirit and the history and the significance of this landscape and think about how awesome it is, what happened there and how it relates back to our history and how we're even here today.
I couldn't say it better, and I say that as a longtime member and a great fan and supporter of all that you're doing. I guess maybe I'll throw a final question to Jim. You know, the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution is coming up. We're talking about 2026, but actually the first shots fired up there in Massachusetts, that anniversary will be in 2025. I'm just curious what the trust has up its sleeves in terms of planning over the next couple of years, initiatives to raise awareness and think about how we as a nation commemorate this significant time.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Scott. Well, a couple of things. One, we're working with something called the 250 Commission, which is a congressionally chartered organization. We're working very closely with them on the history side, of course, of this commemoration, specifically the outdoor classrooms, more specifically Revolutionary War battlefields. The other thing we're doing, which I find fascinating, in fact, I think is one of the most important things the Trust has done, particularly for our future, is we're working on something called the Southern Campaign, which is basically in South Carolina. And interestingly enough, many scholars think that's where the Revolutionary War was actually won in 1780 and 1781, after there was a stalemate in the Northeast, including Brandywine, Monmouth, etc. It moved to the South, and that's where, in effect, the beginning of the end was, the end being Yorktown. But it was largely decided in South Carolina, and there's some 70 different sites down there. We've picked off 15 or 20 sites and stops initially to start telling that story. It's really a story that nobody knows, or almost nobody knows, about where the Revolutionary War arguably was won. And it's got some stars involved. Stars are important in history, and it's got Nathaniel Greene. It's got the Swamp Fox Marion. It's got Moultrie. It's got a bunch of people that people have heard of, and we're combining it into a trail and using technology, the most advanced technology that's out there, and tying the various small battles together to tell a story. And it's a fascinating story. And the technology we're working on, including a Battlefield app that'll tie in all of the various sites and to talk to you while you're going from site to site, plus on the ground interpretation, is something I'm very excited about. And we'll be rolling that out in the next couple of years in anticipation of the 250th celebration and memorialization.
Now, if viewers are interested in finding out more, your website is?
It's battlefields.org. And just go to it, and there's just a ton, with thousands of pages of history on there. In fact, I don't know another site where you can get more Revolutionary War and Civil War history anywhere than on our site. And it's, I recommend it.
Yeah, the maps alone are worth the price of admission.
Thank you. Well, you're a member, and I thank you for being a member, by the way.
You bet.
And so you know that site, and the animated maps, which I mean, we that and our YouTube stuff. If you look at our YouTube stuff, we get like 1 million visits a month just on YouTube. I mean, it's unbelievable. Different battles and campaigns. If you want to get smart quick on any aspect of the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, go to our website.
Fantastic.
Smart quick.
And Virginia, if we're interested in learning more about the Brandywine Conservancy and Art Museum,
please come visit us at brandywine.org.
Mm.
Lots of interesting information and virtual programming and that sort of thing. We'd love to see you come and visit us either in person or online.
Fantastic. Well, I encourage everyone to be members of both of these great organizations, as well as the Museum of the American Revolution. As always, amrevmuseum.org. Virginia, Logan, Jim Lighthizer.
I recommend it, Scott. Everybody, I recommend it. Excellent museum. Excellent museum.
Much appreciated.
My compliments.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the time today, and I look forward to seeing both of you really soon.
Thank you both.
Same here. Thank you very much.
Take care. Yep. Bye-bye.